Well, I'm delighted to be here with Dave Rubin. I think one of the best culture commentators, political commentators on the scene today. Someone I've known for a long time. Glad you came to Rochester, Minnesota to be with us today.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here, and I appreciate the kind words. And, before the camera started rolling, we were trying to figure out how long it's been since we broke bread, metaphorically speaking, I suppose. And it's been about 7 or 8 years probably. And we had a nice run for about 3 or 4 years where we did a lot of shows together. I think we tried to unpack a lot of the mess that we now find ourselves in, probably in a worse situation now. So it's a pleasure to be with you, and hopefully make some sense of things. We will try for an hour. We can probably solve everything. What do you think?
Pretty much everything, yeah. I first met you, I think, about 9 years ago. I was auxiliary bishop out in L.A., and I forget now if we reached out to you or your people. I forget what it was. And the younger people on my staff said, "Oh, God, yeah, Dave Rubin show. Yeah, go on that. That'd be great." And I went down to your home in L.A. where your studio was. Yeah. And we had a great, hour-long conversation. And then Rabbi Wolpe and I sat down with you. Rabbi Wolpe, who was Don Rickles' rabbi. That's how I remember him, right? But we talked about, was it Christmas, Easter, or something? Yeah. But it was an interesting conversation. And then in an earlier iteration of this show, so going back when I was still in California, we met in Carpinteria, that lovely seaside town, and we had a conversation. And then COVID intervened. Then I was sent to Minnesota, and then you moved from California to Florida.
I moved to the free state of Florida. I fled California. We're both refugees of sorts,
right? But of course, all during those years, I was following you, watching your show, and listening to your commentary. And one of the marks of your style, of course, is a willingness to talk to people across the ideological spectrum, which gives you, I think, a lot of range and a lot of credibility. But it's also born of the fact that you've journeyed yourself, in the course of your kind of public career, from a more progressive leftist through, call it classical liberalism, to now a more, I think, clearly conservative position. Maybe let's start with that. You yourself is an interesting object of study. So tell me a little bit of that story of how you got from left to right.
Sure. Well, before we dive into the purely political version of that, I would say it was born out of something that wasn't political. It was born out of just the way my family always was.
Yeah, okay.
We, during holidays, during birthdays, during any event where we were all around the table, we talked about everything.
Yeah.
My dad arguing with my uncle, and my aunt arguing with my mom, and arguing could quite literally be anything: foreign policy, abortion, taxes, anything. Yeah. We were sort of political in that sense all the time. And I'm the oldest of my generation. I'm the oldest. So I was usually sat at the kids' table, but I was always working my way to the adult table, and I would be right at the end. And I didn't chime in that much, but I would listen. But the interesting thing, and I think this is maybe where I learned the thing that I think you're talking about, is that at the end, when dessert was served, everyone stopped. Nobody was angry at anybody. Yeah. Nobody stormed out. We never had a family breakdown like that. It was just like, we're going to argue, and it would get heated. You're talking about serious stuff. It would definitely get heated at times. But then everyone could just put it away.
But you didn't hate each other.
We didn't hate each other.
At the end of the day.
No.
And it's a lost art. How do we get that back?
Well, that's the great challenge of our time. And it's gotten, and when I'm telling you this was happening, I'm a child of the 80s. So we're talking about the 80s.
Right.
This is pre-internet and everything else.
Right.
Now the temperature, and especially post-COVID and all of the things related to how people respond to Trump and everything else, everything has gotten much, much more toxic, obviously. But I think that piece that I learned from my family, that was just how everybody was. Mm-hmm. And these were sort of New York, I would say liberal in the classically liberal sense for the most part, which meant that was part of it. You are going to agree to disagree at times. Yeah. You're going to be able to sit down and have a conversation with people and not take it personally and everything else. So I think I was born into that. And I don't think I even realized that until much later in my life, what a gift that was.
Where I contest your ideas, but I don't hate you. I think you're wrong, but I love you.
And that's why I never, people, I think when we sat down the first time, people were like, what do you mean you're sitting down with Bishop Barron and you probably got some version? What do you mean you're sitting down with Dave Rubin? Why wouldn't we? Right. I'm not that interested in someone that, to sit down with someone that is going to be interested in beheading me after. That would be a problem. Yeah. But I don't mind if we have either, and I don't even know to what extent we even have huge differences anymore, but if they're theological or political or whatever it might be, as long as we respect each other as individuals, and particularly in an American sense, if we believe in this country and we believe in the sovereignty of the individual and that the country was founded for different people to be here, and we can get into all of the foundational ideas behind that. But as long as we have that, then it's great. It's actually great, and it's what makes America so special. So I was sort of born into that. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of my political evolution, basically by the time I was sort of more public about things, and I was on radio for a while in New York, I was on Sirius XM, and then I moved to LA in 2013, and then I was part of the Young Turks network. That's where people started knowing me, and I was, that was hardcore leftism. Yeah. But it was before wokeism.
Right.
So what it was really was, it seemed to me that the progressives were basically liberals on steroids, meaning they were liberals where liberals will sit and chat with you and they're pleasant and do what we're doing right now, and it's fine and we can walk away. Progressives were like, they were angry and they had this righteous indignation and they were yelling about everything all the time. And there was something very attractive about that, right? There was a certain energy that was like, my God, these people are so right about everything, and everyone else, of course, is a racist and a bigot and everything else. But after about a year of working there, so now we're rolling into 2014. Something did not add up for me. I started thinking, this can't be right. We can't be so morally and politically right about everything, and everyone is a bigot and a racist and wrong about everything. And then also because I was so in it over there, I started looking around and thinking, these aren't the most thoughtful people, actually. They're not the kindest people. They're not, all of the things that we're told to believe about the progressive people, they actually were quite the reverse. And so my evolution then, it quite literally happened on camera. I mean, I sat down with people like Dennis Prager. I sat down with, and now I'm talking around 2014, 15. I sat down with Ben Shapiro. I sat down very famously with Larry Elder. And he kind of smacked me around about systemic racism. And even though I had differences with them on big things, again, abortion, all sorts of stuff, what I always found was the conservatives at the end of the conversation were like, boy, that was great. Let's do that again. And let's have dinner. And why don't we continue this and find other ways to explore these ideas? Where the progressives, the more you talk to other people, the more they wanted to push you away. So at this point, I still, the ideology that I believe in as an American, and my political ideology is still classical liberalism. But I often say that, defending my classical liberal beliefs has become a conservative position.
Makes you conservative now.
So, right. And that's the thing. And I think maybe that's why I find common cause with so many people that people think I wouldn't, because in a weird way, the liberals need the conservatives to guard the door. Liberals are very good at, we can have our differences and we can build institutions. I mean, that's what classical liberals really did in this country. But they're not good at ever saying, okay, guys, enough's enough. And because of that, that's why the progressives were basically able to take over liberalism.
Right. Something happened because before we went on camera, we were talking about William F. Buckley, whom I used to watch as a kid. But what I really admire about Buckley is that he was a great friend with someone like John Kenneth Galbraith, with whom he had profound disagreements about politics, economics, everything. But it's lovely to watch the two of them talk because they're around the same age. They obviously like each other. They're friends, and they were disagreeing vehemently, but you knew they went out for dinner afterwards. You knew they had a drink together. You knew that they would get together happily. Or go way back, another hero of mine, G.K. Chesterton, famously debated with atheists across England, and George Bernard Shaw. But they were great friends. And they went to the pub afterwards, and they literally danced on the tables. Something happened that made that impossible. And as you say, the righteous indignation, the anger. And where did that come from? And why particularly on the left did that become such a problem?
Sure. Well, first to the type of person that can do that. Who would want it any other way? Would
Right.
you really prefer to sit around with a bunch of people that you agree with on all things?
Right.
Even from a religious perspective, I have no doubt that when you're engaged in the conversations that you enjoy the most, it's because someone is looking at something and
Sure.
going, I analyze this a little bit differently than you.
Right.
And then you get into it. That's quite literally what makes us different from the animals. We have a brain, we can use it,
Right.
we can use logic and reason. That is the most exciting thing about being a human, right? So the idea that we should just sit with people who we agree with the entire time is completely absurd.
The tribalism, that's the word, isn't it? The tribalism of it. And, I've lived long enough to see some of these trends. Politics, it's always been a divisive business and arguments and all that. But it wasn't tribal the way it is today, was
Right.
it? Again, go back to, LBJ and then his Republican opponents, like an Everett Dirksen. I'm dating myself. Back in the 1960s.
Yeah.
Again, they could sit down and have a cocktail at the end of the day together. Something turned us into this tribalistic.
So I think what happened, well, first off, most people talk about the long march through the institution. So there was a radicalized several generations, really starting in the late 60s through the institutions where people were being taught radically anti-American ideas.
Yeah.
They were being taught sort of soft socialism and all of those things. But then I think really what took place was probably around 2000, somewhere between 2010 and 2015, towards the middle-ish to end of Obama, that when the race part of all of this, which then also turned into the gender part of all of this, when they focused, old school socialism would focus on economic issues.
Right.
But when they turned economic issues, which they would claim their goal ultimately was equity, meaning equal outcomes, when they added race to that, that's when everything went crazy, because then people started thinking that their immutable characteristics were the most important thing. And it is a thing. Your skin color is a thing, I suppose. It's certainly not the most important thing. Your gender, your sexuality, those are not the most important thing. They are a thing. But once you put that on somebody, and this is what they did to really 2 or 3 generations of young people. Once they said to them, boy, your skin color, your sexuality, your gender, these are the most important things about you. And not only are they the most important things, they will be the things that will define you and allow you to believe a certain set of ideas. Once they did that, they put people in this horrific box. What a horrific box to think, I'm a woman, so I must think this way.
Must be in this
or
way, yeah.
really what it did, and now we're seeing the fruits of some of this, is they basically said, if you are a straight white man, you are the worst of all
You're
things.
oppressive by definition.
And you may remember our friend Jordan Peterson years ago, about 8 years ago, I play this clip on my show all the time. He was on Joe Rogan, and he warned. He said, if you think what's going on with this woke left now is bad, wait till you see the reaction to it in a couple of years. And I think we've seen some of that in this past year. So I think it was the racialization and genderization and sexualization of everything. You can also argue there were internet elements of all of this because ideas could spread much quicker. There were algorithmic elements and cultural elements also. I mean, there was a series of things that led us to this strange moment that we're in.
Let's talk about universities a little bit, because you mentioned the long march through the institutions. That's Gramsci's famous line, from a long time ago. But then it's adopted by a lot of people, more radical thinkers, late 60s, 70s. If Chris Rufo was right, he argues that a lot of those people, they didn't go away. They went into the university system as professors. And then you can see it, the influence of, the French postmodernism that comes into our university system by the end of the 60s and 70s. You get the Frankfurt School kind of critique. All of that, in my judgment, is what morphed into wokeism. And it just stayed for probably a couple generations in the universities. And it came pouring out in 2020 onto the streets. But it was a long gestation where this demonization of America, of the West, of Western values, a tendency to divide the world into oppressor and oppressed. I mean, all those things we recognize as wokeism just stated there. True, false? If true, what's the solution?
Well, I do agree with Chris Rufo's commentary on that these guys really focused on that. One of the other differences between, let's say, sort of small c conservatives and this radical left movement is that conservative-leaning people go out and do things, whether that's building a family or building a business or volunteering, etc. They're actually doers generally, right? Where the other guys basically were like, our ideological notions are first. So we will just take over institutions slowly to change people into what we want them to be. So I absolutely do agree with that. And I think that also is what led us to this, because when 2020 hit, so now we're talking, first off, there's a tremendous amount of Trump derangement syndrome stuff. And I say that as someone that didn't even vote for Trump the first time. Obviously, I'm a huge supporter of the president now, which I'm happy to get into if you want. But then you throw in COVID, which clearly broke all sorts of brains and exposed the mainstream media for lying about so many things and all of that. And then it's to the backdrop of the Charlottesville incident, very fine people on both sides, which was a massive hoax and a series of hoaxes. And now you've got kids, everybody, but I think it really hit younger people the most, who are missing graduation, they're missing prom, they're missing their sports, they're missing their whole childhood, they're locked in a room, they're online now all the time, they're playing video games, they're doing all this stuff, their brains are being muddled. Then you throw in the BLM thing, where George Floyd, and suddenly we're being told, you have to stay in your house, you can't go to grandma's funeral, you have to mask, blah, blah. Oh, but for social justice, you can be out on the streets and you can burn down a Pep Boys and wander. And you have politicians quite literally on their knees at the Capitol with George Floyd. And it was all such an assault on the rational mind. It was so obviously self-conflicting. None of it made any sense. But unfortunately, the sense-making apparatus that we had in this country had been obliterated, meaning we didn't have William F. Buckley's anymore. We didn't. We had some people online. I'd like to think I played a tiny, tiny role maybe in helping some people see what was going on, and I didn't fall through it. And maybe I did, and maybe I didn't, and who knows? But we didn't have enough. I don't like the word central exactly, but we didn't have enough people that were going to try to hold a decent center. And then the radicals of the left just saw that. And that's why, you mentioned to me when we sat down, I think we'll talk about him in a little bit, I'm sure. That's why someone like Bill Maher seems like such an anomaly now, because he's still trying to hold the classically liberal position. And it's not that I've abandoned that. I happen to think via voting, Trump is the way to defend most of that stuff. He just doesn't agree on that. But it's why he's such an anomaly. You hear him speak and you're like, oh, that's a liberal, except it just has nothing to do with the Democrat Party of 2026.
Right. Let's talk about those two figures you referenced. First Jordan Peterson, then Bill Maher, which are both interesting characters. Because 2020, which I call the annus horribilis, right? This terrible, and you just delineated exactly why. And that summer of 2020, I remember I'm in California and the riots. I watched the news thinking, what is happening in our country? And I remember going out to the Santa Ynez mission because there was a mob forming to tear down the statue of Junipero Serra, right? Well, we organized a defense. We went out there and had mass and people came and the Knights of Columbus came on their motorcycles and it was quite an interesting thing. But we just kind of stood our ground and the mob went away and never came back, But that's my image from that summer. It was like the country coming apart. And I remember at that time, 2020, Jordan Peterson, who had a huge cultural impact, I think he was sick then. I think he was kind of off the stage publicly. And your comment was, that's contributed to the struggle right now because he was providing a certain moral ballast or a certain intellectual clarity, and suddenly it was gone, and there wasn't the leadership that was needed. Say more about that.
Well, remember a moment ago I referenced what Jordan said on Joe Rogan. What Jordan was doing was acting as the dam, basically, for whatever bad ideas were going to be the reaction to the right. Jordan was the force field against them. And I mean that quite literally. As you know, I toured with him for a year and a half. We did about 120 shows in about 20 countries. When I think back on it now, it feels like a dream to me. Did I actually do that? It was so absolutely incredible. And what I saw was, and I think I can speak to you in religious terms on this, I honestly believe he is a modern prophet. I believe that. What I saw that man do changed the lives of hundreds of thousands and really millions of people, but I saw literal examples of it. I'll tell you the best example of it, and I think this it's a micro version of what you're asking about. We were in Dublin for a show, and it was a very old Irish theater. It was really, really beautiful, kind of run down, but it just felt perfect. It was a really long day. We had a ton of travel. We just got into Dublin that morning. Jordan would do endless press all day long, and he actually wasn't feeling that great at the moment. And I remember telling him, like, Jordan, you got to rest a little bit. It's just a lot. the show ends, and when you're performing in one of these theaters, you don't walk out the main entrance because obviously you're going to get mobbed. You usually just walk out this little side entrance, which is kind of funny because it's usually just in an alley, and it's not the safest place to walk out. But at this time, this is before we didn't have any security with us. It was me, Jordan, his wife, and a tour manager. That's it. It's now 2 a.m., long day. He does the meet and greets, and I never once saw the guy disrespect anybody. He looked everybody in the eye, shook their hand, what's their name, took the picture. Everything I ever saw the man do was an exact avatar for what he wrote about and talked about. Any event, we walk out. It's about 2 a.m. We're very tired. And in the dark alley, about 20 yards away, we see two guys, and there's some kind of commotion. And for a moment, we all kind of froze thinking, because they started moving towards us. And we all thought maybe there was some kind of security issue. Anyway, as they get closer, we see it's a guy man's probably in his, mid to late 50s, young kid, probably early 20s. And they both have tears in their eyes. And you will not believe this. They tell us they're a father and son who had a falling out about 7 years before, had not seen each other in 7 years, both independently read Jordan's book, came alone to the show, saw each other at the show, and made amends. I mean, I just got chills on my spine telling you that, and I've told that story 50 times, and it happens every time.
Yeah.
What he did right there, what could you possibly ask a human to do more with their life, right? And so that sort of correction, that he basically gave people the tools to clean up your room and sit up straight with your shoulders back. And I'd be happy to go through all 12 rules, but he gave people enough of the tools to fix themselves. So when he disappeared during that period, and it was also, it was the height of COVID, MBLM and everything, yes, he was desperately needed. And I would say Jordan right now, he's been gone really since August of 2025. Charlie was killed, obviously, September 10th of 2025. And Jordan's been gone for all of that. And I think a lot of the infighting we've seen on the right has been directly related to, we've lost Jordan Peterson. We've lost Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
We also, we're slightly getting him back right now, but Dennis Prager took a really horrific fall. I did just see him a week or two ago, and he's making more appearances, but in essence, he's a quadriplegic now. He has his mind, thank God. And he's sharp, and his spirit is unbelievable. But in essence, we lost 3 of our best warriors at the worst possible time, and we lost them in short order.
That's very interesting. I didn't see the connection of the 3 of them. I met Prager for the first time. I did this gospel thing with Jordan Peterson, with a bunch of us around a table, and we're just parsing the gospel.
Yeah.
And Dennis was there, and I'd never met him before, and very charmed by him, his public persona, but also privately, But, let's talk about that connection, which is very interesting to me. Jordan Peterson, I've said to him, you live up to your name because you're like the River Jordan. A lot of people cross you to get to religion because I know that for a fact. A lot of people that come to me, they discovered me through him. Mm-hmm. So conversations he and I had online, and that's interesting. And so that he himself isn't quite there yet. Mm-hmm. Like, he'll be very honest about his ability to believe or whatever. Yeah. But he's conduced a lot of people. And he did it, I think, first with, what you're talking about, the rules of life and kind of calling upon basic ethical convictions and all that. But then he began opening up the Bible. Mm-hmm. And I remember saying to my brother bishops at a meeting, I said, brothers, there's this fella out there he's not one of us. He's not a cleric. He's not formally trained in theology. But I said, in person, tens of thousands of young men especially, and then millions online are coming to hear his Bible presentations. He's doing something here, and that we're not doing as effectively. So he was, in my judgment, he was a servant of the grace of God in that,
Well, I think there's no doubt about that whatsoever. As a matter of fact, many, many, many nights that we were on tour, when we would do the Q&A, the question that would come up probably the most was, do you believe in God, right? And Jordan's answer was pretty consistent over that year and a half, and I saw him refine his answer. He didn't really like the question because he always felt, how are you going to ask me this in a Q&A at the end of everything? Right. This is a 10. And sometimes he would do a whole show on that question, actually. But he would get that question all the time, and I was in charge of the Q&A, so I knew I could sort of read if Jordan wanted to do a little more of that on that given night, or if he wanted me to be more funny with the Q&A or whatever it might be. But his basic answer on does God exist, I think is the perfect synthesis of what Jordan is. You have to remember, he's a clinical psychologist and an educator, an academic, right? And then he also obviously is someone who has deep, deep respect for religion and belief. He's trying to piece these two things together, which all the great thinkers really try to do. So his answer usually is something to the effect of that when he was in his 20s, he believed in telling the truth for truth's sake because he thought that that would be ultimately the best outcome no matter what. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy, a good outcome or easy or anything else, but it would be the only way you could in essence add any order to the world. And that in and of itself is a leap of faith. And that's true. That's obviously empirically true, right? That if you tell the truth for the sake of the truth, how could it be? How could, as Jordan would say, something to the effect, how could the nature of reality be that by putting more truth into the world, it would ultimately do worse? Now, it might cause a lot of pain. There could be all sorts of problems on the way for the truth tellers. But I like that. I like that version of it. I like that. To me, it's the right way for someone who wants to keep their analytic mind to the best of their ability and to believe in something beyond them, to synthesize those two things. I will tell the truth because ultimately I think that will be the best outcome. That's a leap of faith. It's not empirically true.
Yes.
And I like that.
Well, and I've had this conversation with him a couple times, and I'm speaking now as a philosopher and a theologian, because we're coming at the same thing from different angles.
Yeah.
If St. Anselm says God is that than which nothing greater can be thought, it's a famous definition of God, definitions, which is an anti-definition. But Jordan talking about like your highest possible aspiration. What is it that's driving your mind, not just to these particular truths, but that commitment to truth. I don't want just particular true things. I want my life to be about the truth. I want my life to be about what's good, right? You're heading toward that than which nothing greater can be thought. Mm-hmm. St. Augustine, our heart is restless till it rests in thee. That's Jordan Peterson all over the place. You've done this, you've done that. I've sought this good, that good. I'm not satisfied. There's always a higher aim. When you say, in principle, the highest aim is the governing force of my life, that's what it means to believe in God, I would say, from a theological perspective.
Well, that's very much Jordan's perspective. I've heard, one of the ways, the best speech I ever saw him give, you can find it online, actually. It was his speech 2 years ago at the ARC conference in London.
Oh, gosh, yeah, I was there.
Oh, all right.
I was there.
How did we not see each other there? We've mentioned a few events that we were at that we didn't see each other. But his speech at the end of that ARC conference where he talks about Jacob's ladder and why you want to build Jacob's ladder.
Yeah.
Because what he's doing is he's taking both worlds. He's taking this world we are in right now, and he's saying, but you can get to something else, but it's not abandoning his belief in logic and reason and all of those things. And I think most people exist in that space. So to not have Jordan in normal times is not great. To not have him in times like we are in right now, politically particularly, it's hugely damaging.
Right. And now make the connection to Charlie, because I mentioned it before the show. He was supposed to be in that chair 3 days after he died. So we had a text exchange. He was due on this show on September 13th. And we had a text exchange, and he's looking forward to seeing you in Minnesota. Yeah, God bless you, Charlie. And then 2 days later, he's dead, right? So heartbreaking to me personally, to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But also, as you suggest correctly, I think, heartbreaking to the country. And what was it? I mean, there was something about him that was a glue that at least was holding the right together, but also was drawing a lot of people to his perspective. It wasn't like he was just defending some little, niche perspective. He was a kind of evangelist, right, for, I would say, basic American and spiritual values.
Yes, he was he was widening the tent of what will save America all the time. And I don't think any of us, and I include myself in this, even though I was quite close with him and we toured together also. I mean, when before I toured with Jordan, Charlie and I and Candace Owens, this feels many lifetimes ago, we would tour. And I was the lefty, right? And, Charlie was the conservative, and Campus was kind of waking up or whatever you want to call it. And we would go to campuses and we'd be, they'd pull fire alarms and throw things at us and all the usual stuff. One night I forget what school we were at, but we were walking to the stage. Some kid throws a hot cup of coffee at us. It hits me and Charlie, mostly me, and I'm dressed in a jacket like I normally do, sports coat. And I'm like, it's going to ruin my coat. And Charlie looks at me and he didn't even flinch. And he just goes, well, that's why I wear a t-shirt. Like he was just, all of the craziness was baked in with him. But none of us realized how Charlie was so vital to holding something sane in America. Charlie, first off, he was able to talk to other people about deep, deep political disagreements, as we referenced earlier, why that's important. But he did it more than anyone. He genuinely did it more than anyone because he would go to college campuses and do it and obviously paid the ultimate price for doing that. So he would go and he would deal with all of the screaming, hysterical people right to their face and never lost his cool. And he was he was a magician at that. Yeah. He was also deeply involved in the political world, which is a whole other thing, right? I mean, he was absolutely integral in getting Trump elected the first time and reelected and everything else. And the last time I saw him was at Mar-a-Lago at a PragerU event. And I tell you, this is exactly the truth. We were standing down in the mezzanine at Mar-a-Lago and Trump walked by on the rafters kind of up there. And I was standing, and Charlie was really tall, and he was basically standing between me and looking up at Trump. And Trump comes and he waves at everybody and whatever. And I said, Charlie, that could be you one day. And he goes, God help us all. That's what he said, and with that funny smile that he had. Right. But he had an unbelievably bright future, obviously. Missing him right now, I think what it did, oddly, was it allowed all of the weird, the alliance that Trump created, if you think about it this way, the MAGA alliance, it's hard to say what it is in terms of pure political belief, right? Right. Because, you've got, you have all these sort of what are thought of as competing interests. So you've got Bobby Kennedy on the same side as, say, the Christian conservatives. Bobby Kennedy is a lifelong liberal whose last name is Kennedy and obviously is different on abortion and, I don't know, medical marijuana, let's say, or just whatever it might be, or gay marriage, whatever, it doesn't matter. But they all were like, wow, we can fit in this thing because it's America. And America allows for these differences. America actually celebrates these differences, which is why every Trump rally that I've ever been to was a party. Even though if you polled everyone there on what they agree on, it might actually be very little. But the bigger thing was we love this country and we're not here to behead people who are different than us. Mm-hmm. Charlie was doing that while Trump was doing it at the political level and sort of the wide cultural level, Charlie was doing it on the ground level with young people. And in some sense, you could argue his version of it was more important because we already talked about how the institutions were so brainwashing these kids that he became the only off-ramp for them. So him going down, I never would have, I don't think anyone could have predicted how bananas certain parts of the right would go. And in some cases, people that I think Charlie believed were his friends, to be dancing on his grave and sullying his legacy and everything else. So I've tried desperately to honor him the best way I can and not use Charlie's death for my own political purposes. Yeah. Where I see a lot of people, Charlie said this and that means this, and I really try not to do that. Right. I play clips of Charlie and say, here's what Charlie said.
Let's stay with that for a second, because we've talked about how the left went crazy. So wokeism is kind of like liberalism run amok, right? But we're witnessing now, as you've been saying, the elements of the right going crazy and losing the narrative and turning to forms of anti-Semitism and turning to all kinds of crazy. What in the world? And I think you're right in saying that Charlie Kirk was very helpful in keeping that together, keeping it sane. Yeah. What happened on the right? Why is the right splintering the crazy way that it is?
Right. Well, again, I would connect it to that commentary by Jordan on Joe Rogan's show about what will happen one day. So we shouldn't sit here and be shocked by it. I think what we should be shocked by is what I just referenced, which is we should be shocked how it went on steroids once Charlie died. That there was, we had this weird moment. If you remember that week after Charlie was assassinated, I happened to be in New York City. I was going for a 9/11 event. So I was in New York City. And I did all these 9/11 events, and I did a whole bunch of stuff on Fox that day about Charlie. I was supposed to be there again for 9/11, but they ended up bringing me in for all this Charlie stuff. And I remember thinking, and I was in New York City for 9/11. I was there for it. My dad saw the second plane hit from his office. I can tell you all sorts of stories about that. But I remember thinking that day, in a weird way, this feels bigger than 9/11. And I know that is, in some sense, a crazy statement to make. But it felt, certainly in the moment, in the immediacy of it, it kind of felt right. But if you look at now what has happened over the last 8 months with a certain set of people, and if you want to name names, we can name names. I don't even think it's necessary in some sense. People know who we're talking about. Charlie wanted to keep MAGA alive. And Charlie loved freedom. What was the shirt? What did it say on his shirt? It said freedom.
Yeah.
It said freedom. Freedom incorporates a lot of different things. Right? A lot of different things that maybe the secular lib coming into this movement feels differently about than the Christian conservative. But can they exist in the same country? Yes, and it's America. And America is basically the only place they can do that. And if we give that up, we give everything away. So it was literally on his chest when he died. So I don't think anyone thought it would have broken down so quickly. But now I'll give you, I'm not a black pill guy. I'm a white pill guy. I always consider myself a world-weary optimist. But I have to be an optimist, as I suspect you are, because how else could we do this, do something like this for a living? How could we sit here and talk about things if we didn't think we could angle them to be a little bit better? The white pill on this is that when the left was going crazy 10 years ago, and obviously I was right in the middle of that, there were almost no liberals willing to stand up against it.
Yeah.
There were a couple. Sam Harris, Bill Maher, Jordan, although he wasn't liberal truly, but he was kind of right there. There were a few people willing to stand up against it. What I have seen on the right in this past 8 months or so since Charlie's death is extraordinary. The right is fighting. The right is saying there are some things that are not acceptable and ushering in ancient hatreds that we should have left a long time ago and the worst ideas of all time. No, we're not going to do it. So there is a fight on the right that did not happen on the left. And I believe that the right will beat this thing. I think the polling absolutely indicates that. Trump clearly has chosen the right side of this, so to speak. So I think there's a much better chance the right will survive this and not become exactly what the left has become.
That's interesting. Say a bit in that context about anti-Semitism, because we referenced Buckley already. And, as everyone points out, back in the 50s, Buckley made this decision to kind of extricate from his movement the John Birch Society and anti-Semitic elements. And he said, look, the movement I'm advocating here, kind of classical conservatism, should not include those elements. And it was a very important decision he made. A lot of people critiqued him and said, I'm done with you, and you become, a radical yourself. But Buckley stuck to his guns, and it was the right decision. The anti-Semitism on, both the left and the right, to be honest about it, but what's the right move now? Would it be for people on the sensible right to say, all right, look, do what Buckley did. You're not this is just not appropriate.
Well, the left, we can do the left version because it's very easy quickly. The left, basically Jews are thought of as white, but even sort of extra white and successful.
So super oppressive.
Right, and successful and all those things. And it also, what really doesn't make sense is the Jews in some sense, if you were to look at one group, are the ultimate minority because they're still here. The Jews are still here after thousands of years, right? People always talk about, there's all these countries that kick the Jews out as if it's the minority's fault. Well, most of those empires and countries don't exist anymore. So you might want to think about what happens when you start turning on the Jews, because it's not that you're turning on the Jews only. You're usually turning on all of the good principles that allow for minorities and other people to exist in your nations. And that's not good for nations on the other side. So it's very obvious why they don't fit. And then to the backdrop of October 7th, that they've created just the grandest of all lies related to the founding of Israel and the connection that the Jewish people have to that land. And that, we could do a quick history lesson. It's, in some sense, it's boring, but that a state of Palestine never existed for a people known as Palestinians. And the coin, people always show you the coin of Palestine, and it quite literally, it's the British mandate of Palestine, not a country, which is why it didn't have a prime minister. And that in Hebrew, it says the land of Israel on it, and all of these things. But because they marched through the institutions, they taught people this incredible lie that somehow the Jews, where was Jesus born? Where did the story of Hanukkah take place? It's Judea and Samaria, which is now unfortunately, people call it the West Bank. Mm-hmm. It's just the West Bank of the Jordan River. So Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib or even AOC, on Hanukkah, they'll wish Jews a happy Hanukkah. And then by the next day, they don't want any Jews living in the place that Hanukkah took place. It was literally the Jews defending their land against the Greeks. So that just doesn't work. None of it works. There's so many lies, and the intersectional calculator doesn't work for the left. Now on the right, I think there's a couple things happening. One is that on the right, there is, I think you can be a principled isolationist. I'm just talking about a pure political sense. You can be an absolute isolationist. Mm-hmm. America should be more basically like Sweden or something, or Switzerland, and we're just not going to have anything to do with the rest of the world, and we're anti-war and all those things. I think that's a perfectly fine position, I suppose so, but I don't think it's the most mature position. I don't think it really equates with reality in some sense. Just saying you're anti-war doesn't get you no war. In some sense, it probably gets you a really bad war on your shores because obviously there are bad guys out there. But I think some sense of that leads to, Israel's in the Middle East and there's always wars in the Middle East. So there's some weird isolationist connection to that. Then there's some weird things that you could probably speak to better than I can related to replacement theology and things of this nature. I've never once had any issue with any of my Christian friends or my Catholic friends or any denomination thereof related to being Jewish and that. Like it's always, my best friends to this day, my two best friends, we're turning 50 this summer. We're all going to Vegas. My buddy John, Italian, Catholic. My buddy Ari, Greek Orthodox. Yeah. And ironically, the three of us were friends now for about 45 years, met when we were in kindergarten, basically. We celebrated all our holidays together. It was great. They would come to my house for Shabbat dinner or to light Hanukkah candles. I would go to Ari for Greek Orthodox, and we'd roast a lamb. We would put up the tree at John's house for Christmas. Yeah. And it just was never even a thing in any level whatsoever. So now 45 years later, we have the fruits of that, of a great lifelong friendship that hopefully will take us into our 90s. So I think there's some weird religious stuff happening there. And then I think there's just something that is baked in, unfortunately, which is that, Jews just celebrated Passover as Christians were celebrating Easter. And Passover is the story of bondage to freedom, right? And within that story, if you sit at the Passover table, no matter what Haggadah you're reading, they talk about how in every age someone will rise up to destroy us. It's baked into the code in some sense. And Jews are the canary in the coal mine. So if you're going to, let's put it this way, here's the simplest way, and then I'll stop. If you're on the side of the Jew haters right now, or what is now becoming really anti-American too. That's the weird thing. It would be one thing if you just hate Jews. Yeah. Well, as long as you're not attacking them, I'm fine with, you can hate whoever you want, but it usually doesn't just stop with that, right? But now they're connecting it to deep anti-American stuff and kind of pro-Iran and pro-Russia and a whole bunch of other things. But this is what I would say. If you think that if you can remove Jews from public life altogether, or we can do some pogroms or whatever you want to do, and that America will be better or safer on the other side. It's crazy. It's dangerous. And it's not because of what the Jews will do to you. It's because there's something tied to the fabric of reality related to all that. The story of the Jews is the story of man in a way. And then we can all have the offshoots of all of that and all of those things. And I've never found that to be in conflict. The last time I was in Israel, I went to the city of David, which, have you been there yet? Yeah. Have you been? Sure. It is, you probably took the tour with the same guy I took. Probably. I can't remember his name. But to walk, we did it right before it opened publicly. So the scaffolding was still there. And they talk about how these are undoubtedly the steps that Jesus walked. And they show you the podiums there where clearly the preachers would have stood. It's incredible. And in no way do I find that in conflict with anything else that I believe politically, theologically, or anything else.
I'm trying to think this together, the stuff we've been talking about. I did a little piece after Charlie died called He Died with a Microphone in His Hand. So instead of an instrument of aggression, he died with an instrument of communication in his hand. And I suggested go all the way back to the beginning of the Western philosophical tradition. Socrates is not so much a university lecturer. He's a guy that went out on the street and asked questions and engaged in dialogue. Comes up through the Middle Ages. My hero, Thomas Aquinas, all his writings are based upon an open conversation. You say this, I say that. And go up all the way to the founding of America. It's predicated upon our capacity to have civil public conversations about things. Then I think of your friends, that you're able to talk to each other despite differences of ideology. That's the American thing, right? That's the best, I would say, of the spiritual tradition of the West, to speak very broadly. That would include cultural, political, and religious dimensions. My take, and it's just helping me to talk through with you, that's what's under attack in some ways.
Yes.
From left or right, when that's under attack, we got serious trouble going on.
Well, not only do I agree with that, I like what you said about Charlie with the mic. A lot of times right before I go on stage at a theater or something, I'll take a picture of the mic and I quote Obi-Wan Kenobi, an elegant weapon for a more civilized age. That's what the microphone is. And that, if we can't debate these things, I mean, look what's happened just in the last couple of days. I don't know when you guys are going to post this, but there was a third assassination attempt on Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Okay. When I saw it, I didn't have my phone for a little bit, and then I look at my phone, I have all these texts, and I'm looking at Twitter and everything, and I see that Trump's okay and they got the guy. So, and I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to bed right now. I was about to go to bed anyway, and I was like, I'm not going to stay up and stare at all this. But when I woke up the next morning, I thought, boy, what does that tell you about where we're at? There was an assassination attempt on the president, and because it's already happened twice, basically I looked at it for 10 seconds and went to bed. Yeah. What is slowly happening to us? And as I said on my show the next morning, even a scarier thought than that is, imagine how close we are to the precipice of something we can't even begin to imagine. If one of these guys gets the president, imagine if the unthinkable had happened just a few days ago. Well, I'd likely still be sitting here with you, but imagine what world we would be in at that point. We have no idea how absolutely off the rails everything could go. And that's why we need this type of thing more than ever, because as algorithms keep, we don't know what we're being fed online and how we're being manipulated. And you mentioned the bots before. We're in a massive information war at the same time. And if we can't figure out what makes us the United States of America, what makes the states united, what makes us as people united, well, this experiment, we're rolling into our 250th year, but that's not that long, and it could be over before 300.
It's a capacity for civil conversation, which is predicated in turn upon some basic values held in common. So it's not everything's up for grabs. Let's just talk about everything. Yeah. No, the conversation is structured. If it's not structured, then it's not going to be a conversation. There's got to be certain basic assumptions in place. Now look at the Declaration of Independence, look at the Constitution, look at the Federalist Papers. They're articulating those great values. Someone like Jordan Peterson, I think, is putting his finger on what some of those values are, right? You need that combination of a structured civil conversation to make it happen. I talked to you all day, but you mentioned Bill Maher earlier, and Bill Maher to me is fascinating. He and I are about the same age. He was raised a Catholic because his dad was Catholic, his mother was Jewish, but he went to Catholic school. And so we would have been trained like at the same.
And they didn't even know that his mother was Jewish, until he was in his teens or something like that. Yeah.
And then I would have known Bill Maher as a comedian back in the 80s. He's a Merv Griffin show and Johnny Carson show, right? So I knew him. And then he begins his kind of career as a political commentator. But he first really came on my radar as a great critic of religion. And I hated him. I thought, that Religulous movie, he just took the worst examples of fundamentalism and said, well, that's religion.
It was a little heavy-handed.
He never talked to a serious religious person. Yeah. It was a lot of caricaturing. So he just sort of turned me off. But I had the Romans call the Gaudium de Stilo, when you have kind of a joy in someone's style. There was something about Maher that I enjoyed watching. So I kept watching him. And he eventually dropped religion. He stopped talking about religion. And he started talking about wokeism. And I kept saying, yeah, that's it. Yes. And I'm like applauding with the crowd. So Maher to me is a fascinating figure because, boy, he's one of the only classical liberals, as you say, who really called out the kookiness of the left. And you become friends with Maher, huh? So you've come to know him. Tell me a bit about your sense of him.
Well, first off, we sat courtside at a Lakers game, which was basically, I'm a huge basketball guy. I don't really watch current NBA anymore, but to sit courtside at a Lakers game with a guy who he really was my comic hero from back then. So I remember watching Politically Incorrect in the 90s, thinking that's what I want to be one day. So the fact that, I've been on Club Random and I've been on Real Time and that we've become friends, like, it showed, wow, I did something in my life. Like I had this like idea and I wanted to do something. And then this guy who I admired tremendously, like thinks I'm cool. Like there's just something cool about that, right? What I would say is interesting about Bill is that, well, there's a couple things. The fact that he is still holding out that classically liberal position. You know, sometimes when we play clips of him, we usually do them on Mondays because Real Time's on Friday. And we have a little cartoon intro and we call it Mondays with Mar. And we have sort of a funny song playing and it's me holding his hand and I'm dragging him to an American flag. And the reason we do it that way is that Bill is right about most of the issues, I would say, roughly. Let's say you absolutely disagree with him on abortion. And actually, I'm closer to your position on abortion than I am with Bill. But let's say he's roughly right about what America is and free speech and things like that. What the conclusion I've come to is that Donald Trump at a political level is the best guy to accomplish that, that there's nothing left in the Democrat Party to accomplish those things if you care about free speech, if you care about capitalism, if you care about law and order, et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing left for you. Yes, you have you and John Fetterman, and it's a lonely boat, and good luck. However, there is something to be said for somebody that stakes out that position and says, I will not move. Now, if he voted, I don't know if he even voted, but if he voted for Kamala, I would think, boy, that's...
He said he did, I think.
Yeah,
right?
did he say he did?
So.
I know he didn't vote for Trump, so okay. So to me, that I just don't understand how you could take all your positions that you're right about and then vote for someone who's antithetical to all of those things. But that's a small piece, actually, in a way. The position where he gets up there every Friday night on that show, brings on people who he agrees and disagrees with, as we talked about, and then says, I'm here and I did not change. I do think that is admirable. And, you know, if you sat down with him and you debated abortion for 2 hours, I don't think you would change his opinion, but I don't think either one of you would leave angry.
Yeah.
And I think that clearly is the theme that we keep coming back to here.
Right. And I admire that about him very much, that he does have people on. And he often complains because Democrats don't come on my show.
Yeah.
Republicans come on my show.
Can I tell you something? So when I did Club Random, which is about 2 or 3 years ago, I said to him something that I now realize I did light a little fire in him. I said to him, Bill, this is before he had sort of made amends with Trump and everything, before the last election. I said, Bill, tell me this. If you went to a Trump rally, I can tell you what would happen. You go to a Trump rally and people would love it. They would be like, holy cow, Bill Maher's here. They'd be like, I disagree with him on some stuff and he's a little wacky on abortion. Abortion would probably be the big one. But they'd be like, it's Bill Maher. How cool. It's great. It's great. I said, Bill, what would it be like if you showed up to an AOC rally? Yeah. You would be hated. And I can send you the clip. His eyes like this. He suddenly was like, you're right. Yeah. You're right. And so that's the interesting thing where your voting habits, okay, his voting habits are one thing, but the idea set is something else. And I think as the years go by, he will just find common cause with people. You know what? It's very similar to Richard Dawkins, who's obviously a hugely well-known atheist. He's now very appreciative. He's spent his life trying to basically destroy Christianity, but now...
appreciates Christian culture.
Because he realizes that Islam, as it encroaches on the West, is now a much bigger issue. So suddenly he's very appreciative of living in a Christian culture. So whether he can grapple with that or what he's going to say on his deathbot or whatever.
Well, the question is, can you get a Christian culture without Christianity? And I would say no, ultimately.
No, I would say no. And this
enjoying the fruits of something that he's trying to destroy the plant, you know.
Well, this was always the debate. And in some sense, this is what separates maybe the classical liberal from the conservative. Did it all start with the Enlightenment or was there something beneath that? That's what Jordan and Sam Harris debated for years. I've come closer, obviously, to your version of that.
That's a good question, I think. You know, that's my philosopher's hat on. That's a really interesting question. I would say the best of the Enlightenment is a fruit of Christianity. Yes. The worst of the Enlightenment is a distortion of it. And so there should not be a conflict between Christianity and the Enlightenment. In the French Revolution, there was indeed, because, I mean, that became a radicalized and it became deeply anti-clerical, anti-religious. Our revolution, thank God, was not. Even though you had, you know, deists like Jefferson and Ben Franklin, but you had a lot of very committed Christians who gave rise to the American experiment. Yeah. And it's not by its nature anti-clerical or anti-religious. That's, I was on this Religious Liberty Commission. We just finished our work. But that's the basic assumption of it, is that the American commitment to religious liberty is a Christian idea. It's not, opposed to Christianity or trying to limit Christianity. It comes up out of the heart of Christianity. So end of sermon on that.
Yeah. Well, I would say, Bill, as time goes on, I think he realizes that more and more. It's also why during COVID, most of the people that I found were kind of sane during COVID happened to be religious.
Yes.
Because they believed in something else beyond what Anthony Fauci was telling them every day.
Did you notice this? It struck me in 2020. So the great civil rights movement, right, of the 50s and 60s, didn't just have religious people in it. It was led by religious people, most notably King, but many others too. Mm-hmm. It was led by deeply biblical people. Mm-hmm. Rabbi Heschel,
right. Most of the white people, the white quote unquote people that King was marching with were Jews, actually.
Yes. Yeah. So it was led by religious people. 2020 riots, religious people were conspicuous by their absence because the woke revolution doesn't like religion. The civil rights movement came from religion. It came from that narrative you just rehearsed.
Well, because woke is a cult, not a religion.
No, right.
And that's the difference.
Right. But it struck me as a very interesting difference. The hostility to religion, which has been part of the university culture for too long, too. That came out of that whole wokeist mentality. Religion's on the side of the oppressor and all that. Okay, let me ask this question.
Yeah.
How do you explain Bernie Sanders? Now, here's what I mean. So
I'd rather do deep existential stuff. This is pretty thin, but okay.
No, I think it's related to it though, because I come from a very strong Democratic family. So I'm a Chicago Catholic. That meant Mayor Daley, and it meant, like my dad who loved politics, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry S. Truman, Adlai Stevenson, John F. Kennedy. Those were his political heroes. I grew up, one of my earliest political memories is the Republican convention in 1972, and my father lustily booing Richard Nixon, right? And that's my background. But my father, who's been gone for a long time, but he would be like a conservative Democrat, let's say, sort of a classic, the pro-working class.
Right, blue dog Democrat.
Blue dog Democrat. Yeah. That's what he would be now. If you told my father, running for president is a wild-haired 70-something socialist from Vermont who's advocating these, kind of wild left, my father was like, "What? Are you crazy? He'll never get anywhere," right? Which is exactly what I thought when he first emerged. How did he manage to yank the Democratic Party so far to the left that now it's like it seems to be a simulacrum of what it was?
Well, it's a good question because, if we just mock him, it's easy. I do Bernie impressions on my show all the time. And if we just mock them, it doesn't really, it's fun in a way, but it doesn't really get to what they've done.
What's the appeal? Like, how did he manage to do that?
Right. Well, you have to give the devil his due. You have to give them credit for accomplishing, and I'll change the word. You have to give them credit for destroying an awful lot, mostly the minds of young people. Bernie Sanders, his legacy will not be politics. Bernie Sanders has no major piece of legislation written in his name. He's been in the Senate for 40 years. He's virtually done nothing. Actually, in terms of granular policy, he's done virtually nothing. But what he did do was push socialism, always. The answer to every problem was always the government. And that was, in some sense, he was a fringe figure up, until about 10 years ago. He was sort of, far left, so he was on the debate stage for a couple presidential things, but he was considered far left and everything. But then what happened? And I think Bernie just took advantage of this in a very cynical way. When he saw the woke thing happening, woke is basically socialism, but now let's throw in a dash of race and let's throw in a dash of sexuality and gender, make it about equity, repackage this, right? Let's package this into something else. And then he ran with that. Now, the irony, of course, is that this will not end well for an old, white, really Jewish socialist. Like the revolution will come for him too. There will be some position or as they go more radical now, which is, because now the marriage of progressivism and Islamism is getting so tight that as horrible as Bernie Sanders is on Israel and just he's not Jewish by any, maybe he has a bagel once a year, but he's not Jewish by any real account, but I'm not the arbiter of who is Jewish. but he only mentions it when he's trying to attack Israel or something like that. Eventually, something so radical will happen that they will get rid of him or he will find it an affront. But that's one of the tricks they've used with everybody, is that even if you think about what's happening just related to this last assassination attempt, they've been subtly winking towards violence, that violence is okay. You know, the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, who got executed in Times Square, not a lot of lefties said anything bad about it. They were kind of like, well, healthcare system's bad. Now, ironically, the healthcare system, including United Healthcare, got much bigger because of Obamacare, but that's a whole other issue. But they've been winking towards a low-level violence is kind of okay.
Acceptable.
Right. Yeah. And eventually, that will take everybody out, because once you give a nod to that, congratulations. All of us on the other side might think you're just as bad on your side. And now if we start doing it, I mean, that is literally what all of our ancestors fled the old world from.
And again, think Charlie Kirk with the microphone in his hand being shot to death by someone. There's the contrast, right?
That's
a polity based upon lively civil conversation versus one based upon violence. And that's what worries me the most, honestly.
Yeah. So to just fully connect this to Bernie, I think his legacy will be that he softened the ground via democratic socialism, which you can literally find videos of mine 8 years ago saying they're going to drop the Democrats soon enough. And now they have. Now they're just open socialists. And by the way, we don't know where this is going to go. In 2 years, they'll be open communists, which in essence is what Mamdani is in New York anyway. But he softened the ground so that they could usher in all of these bad ideas. And, you know, it's unbelievably ironic that someone like him who's, you know, he used to rail against millionaires. Then he became a millionaire. Now he rails against billionaires. You know, it's a good problem to have.
Right.
You know, that he taught young people basically that envy of what other people have is righteousness. It's the complete reverse of everything that you believe in, that you would believe in from a religious perspective, that I could make the same argument from a secular perspective, and that he has done that. But they're almost done with him. Don't worry. He'll be eaten by the revolution.
But now, unfortunately, we're out of time. But you mentioned...
Well, we'll pick this up on my show. We're just going to switch seats maybe.
All right. You mentioned Mamdani, and sometime we'll talk about the warmth of collectivism. I actually heard him utter that line. I forget what, I was home and I was watching TV and something just in me tightened when I heard that. I mean, does he have any idea collectivism and what that has meant?
Oh, I think he knows.
You know,
I think he absolutely knows.
The warmth of it?
I'm a little more aggressive when it comes to talking about what's really going on with him. You know, a lot of people seem to think, oh, he's just a socialist or he's just a communist and he doesn't know what he's doing and it's big government and it never works. I think that the marriage now between that and the Islamism portion of what's going on here, his goal is to destroy New York City. He is trying to push out all of the, in essence, the creators, the good people, the earners. They are trying to implode the city because then they can turn it into what they really want to turn it into, which is a mini caliphate or something like that. I don't think there's anything not cynical about him or dumb or anything else. I think there's absolutely a plan when it comes to him.
Next time we'll talk about it. Listen, a delight, Dave, being with you.
Pleasure as always.
We covered a lot of ground, but a lot more to cover. And it's, you know, maybe it's in honor of our friend Charlie Kirk, who was supposed to be in that chair, that we would continue having these, you know, frank and public conversations. So God bless you for that.
Next time, come to Miami. Our weather's a little bit...
During next winter, I'll come down.
It's a little warmer.
God bless you.
Pleasure, my friend.
Thanks.